I never thought I'd be the guy who walks out on his marriage. But here's the thing nobody tells you about being a step-parent. You can do everything right and still end up being the villain in someone else's story. I'm 29 years old. I work in logistics management, which means 50-hour weeks are completely normal for me. And I own my house outright because I saved like crazy through my entire 20s. I met Sarah when I was 27. She was 29 with 3 kids from her previous marriage, ages 8, 10, and 12 at the time. Everyone in my life told me I was absolutely crazy to date a woman with 3 kids. My mom practically had a heart attack when I told her. But honestly, Sarah seemed like she had her life together. The kids were okay, a little wild, but nothing I couldn't handle, and their biological father paid child support on time every month, even though he barely saw them maybe once or twice a month. Sarah had a decent job working at a medical office doing billing. We split dates 50-50, and she never once made me feel like I was supposed to be their new dad or some kind of replacement father figure. That was really important to me. I liked the kids fine. They were good kids when they wanted to be, but I wasn't trying to replace anyone or step into some role I never auditioned for. We dated for about a year. Everything felt natural and easy. We got married at a small ceremony with just close family and friends. And for the first 6 months of marriage, everything was exactly what I thought I was signing up for. I helped out when I could. We did family dinners a few times a week, and the weekends were ours to figure out together as a blended family. Sometimes the kids stayed with us all weekend. Sometimes they had sports or birthday parties or sleepovers with friends. Sometimes we'd all go do something fun like the zoo or a movie. It felt balanced. It felt like an actual partnership between 2 adults. Then something shifted, and I still can't pinpoint the exact moment when it happened. It started small, so small I didn't even notice the pattern forming. Sarah asked if I could watch the kids one Saturday morning while she went to a yoga class downtown. Sure, absolutely no problem at all. Then it was yoga plus brunch with her girlfriends afterward. Okay, fine, I get it. She needs social time. Then it became every single Saturday, then Saturdays and Sunday mornings. Then suddenly I was spending entire weekends with 3 kids who weren't biologically mine while she was out rediscovering herself and getting her life back. And here's what nobody tells you about stepkid dynamics when you're dating someone with children. If the biological parent doesn't enforce rules and boundaries, you literally can't either without becoming the bad guy. Sarah was all about gentle parenting, which apparently meant 0 consequences for anything ever. The oldest kid, 14 now, would go through my personal belongings without asking permission and break my things. Last month, he went through my toolbox in the garage and snapped my expensive torque wrench trying to fix his bike. When I asked Sarah to talk to him about respecting other people's property, she said boys will be boys and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. The middle one, 12, talked back constantly to both of us and refused to do even basic chores like taking out trash. I once asked him to clear his dishes from the table, and he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not my dad. I don't have to listen to you." Sarah just laughed it off. The youngest, 10, was actually pretty sweet, and I genuinely liked him, but he made insane messes everywhere because nobody ever taught him to clean up after himself. When I tried to set any kind of reasonable boundaries, Sarah would immediately swoop in and tell me I was being too harsh or too strict or too mean. But when they acted up while under my watch, when they broke something or fought with each other, suddenly it was my fault for not controlling them properly. The double standard was absolutely insane. I work a genuinely stressful job in an industry that never sleeps. I'm on phone calls with freight carriers and warehouse managers and clients who are literally screaming about delayed shipments and lost products. I'm putting out fires from 7 in the morning until 6 at night, sometimes later if there's a crisis. My job requires constant problem solving and decision making and dealing with angry people who want answers I don't always have. The weekends were my only real time to decompress, to do absolutely nothing, to just exist as a human being without someone needing something from me every 5 minutes. But now every Friday night, Sarah would have this look of expectation in her eyes, and every Saturday morning, she'd be out the door with her yoga mat before I even woke up, and I'd hear the kids already fighting downstairs. I started to feel less like a husband and more like a live-in babysitter who also happened to pay most of the bills. Our house, by the way, was mine before we even met. I bought it when I was 25 years old, spent years fixing it up room by room, painting and doing repairs and making it exactly what I wanted. Sarah and the kids moved in after the wedding, and I never made a big deal about it being my house because that felt petty and weird. But the reality was I was covering the mortgage, all the utilities, most of the groceries, all the home repairs and maintenance. She paid for her car payment, and some of the kids' extracurricular activities. The financial split was maybe 70-30 if I'm being honest, and I was completely fine with that arrangement because I made significantly more money than she did. But I wasn't fine with being treated like free childcare on top of being the primary breadwinner. Around month 8 of our marriage, I tried to have a calm and rational conversation about the situation. I told her I needed more balance in our life, that I couldn't be the default weekend parent when I wasn't actually their legal parent or adopted father. She didn't yell at first. She just got really quiet and said I knew what I was signing up for when I married her. I said yes. I signed up to be your husband and a supportive step-parent, not a full-time babysitter. That's when she started crying and said I was rejecting her children, that a real man would step up without being asked, that her ex-husband was a deadbeat, and she thought I was different from him. I felt like absolute garbage. I backed off the conversation completely. I kept watching the kids on weekends without complaint, but it somehow got even worse. She started going out on Friday nights too, not just weekends. Girls' nights at bars, wine tastings, concerts downtown. She was out living her best life while I was home making boxed mac and cheese and breaking up screaming fights over video game controllers. Her friends would post pictures on Instagram and Facebook, and she'd be in the background dancing and laughing, looking happier than I'd seen her in months of actual marriage. One night, she came home at midnight smelling like alcohol and perfume, and I was passed out on the couch with the youngest kid asleep on my lap because he'd had a nightmare and wouldn't go back to bed without someone nearby. She didn't even ask how the night went, just stumbled upstairs to bed. Meanwhile, I was in our living room at 2 in the morning carrying a sleeping 10-year-old back to his room and wondering how this became my life. The kid's biological father was basically a ghost in their lives. He paid his court-ordered child support on time. I'll give him that. But he saw them maybe once a month if that, always canceling plans at the last possible minute. Sarah complained about him constantly, called him unreliable and selfish, but she also never actually pushed him to be more involved in their lives. It was just easier to rely on me instead. 3 weeks ago, everything finally came to a head in the worst possible way. It was a Friday night. I'd just gotten home from an absolutely brutal week at work where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and I was genuinely looking forward to sleeping in on Saturday and doing absolutely nothing productive. Sarah came into the bedroom while I was changing out of my work clothes and said we needed to talk about something important. She sat down on the edge of the bed and told me that starting this weekend, she needed me to take the kids every single Saturday and Sunday, not just a few hours in the morning, all day, both days, every single weekend from now on. She said she'd completely lost herself in motherhood and marriage, and she desperately needed time to remember who she was as an individual person. I just stared at her like she'd grown a second head. I asked what I was supposed to do about my own time, my own mental health and sanity. She said this was what being a real family meant, that sacrifices had to be made. I said no, just like that. A simple, clear no. She blinked at me like I'd physically slapped her across the face. She asked what I meant by that. I said, I mean, no, I'm not doing that. I need my weekends too. We need to find a different solution that works for both of us. Her entire face changed in an instant. She stood up from the bed and her voice went ice cold in a way I'd never heard before. Step up or get out. That's exactly what she said, word for word. Not let's talk about this like adults. Not let's find a compromise we can both live with. Not let's figure this out together as partners. A straight ultimatum. Step up or get out. I looked at her standing there with her arms crossed tight across her chest, waiting for me to cave and apologize like I always did whenever we fought, and something inside me just snapped completely. I walked over to my closet and pulled out my old duffel bag from the top shelf. She asked what the hell I was doing. I started packing clothes, enough for at least a week. She said I was being dramatic and childish. I packed my toothbrush, my phone charger, my laptop, my work clothes for Monday morning. She followed me from room to room saying I was throwing a tantrum like her kids did, that I'd cool off overnight and come crawling back. I loaded everything into my car while she stood in the driveway, actually yelling that I was abandoning her and her family, that I was just like her ex-husband. I got in my car, backed out of my own driveway, and drove straight to my brother's apartment across town. My phone started absolutely blowing up before I even made it to the highway. Texts, calls, voicemails coming in every few seconds. I turned the phone on silent and just kept driving into the night. I stayed at my brother's place that first night and barely slept at all. My phone was going absolutely insane with notifications. Like every few minutes there was a new text or voicemail from Sarah. I finally looked at them around 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep, and they were exactly what you'd expect. The first few were angry, calling me immature and selfish and saying I was abandoning my family over nothing. Then they shifted to sad, saying she didn't mean what she said and we should talk about this like adults. Then back to angry again, saying I was proving I never really loved her kids. Then her sister started texting me. Then her mom called 3 times in a row. I turned my phone completely off and tried to get some sleep on my brother's couch. My brother, by the way, was incredibly cool about the whole situation. He made up the couch for me, gave me some spare blankets, and didn't ask too many questions that first night. The next morning over coffee, he just said I could stay as long as I needed and that he always thought Sarah expected too much from me. That first week was absolutely surreal, like I was living in some alternate reality version of my life. I went to work like normal, came back to my brother's apartment, and watched my phone light up constantly with messages I didn't answer. Sarah's texts got more and more desperate as the days went on. She'd switch between begging me to come home and calling me every name in the book. Her friends started getting involved too. People I thought were my friends, telling me I was wrong for walking out. Her sister showed up at my workplace on Wednesday, which was completely out of line, and caused a scene in the parking lot saying I needed to think about those kids. I told her the kids had a father, and it wasn't me, and she called me a heartless bastard. By the end of week 1, I heard through a mutual friend that Sarah had hired a babysitter to cover the weekends. Good, I thought. That's what she should have done from the beginning instead of volunteering me to do it. I figured maybe this would all blow over. We'd get divorced quietly, and life would move on. I was wrong. Week 2 is when things started falling apart for her. The babysitter quit. I found out because Sarah left me a voicemail screaming about how the babysitter said her kids were completely out of control and she couldn't handle them. Sarah blamed me for this somehow. Said if I'd been there to help establish routines, this never would have happened. The mental gymnastics were absolutely Olympic level. She tried to get her mom to come stay with her and help with the kids, but her mom lived 3 states away in Florida and had her own life. Her mom told her, and I only know this because her sister told someone who told me, that Sarah made her bed and now she had to lie in it. Even her own mother wasn't willing to drop everything to fix Sarah's problem. That's when Sarah's work situation started imploding. She'd been skating by at her medical billing job, but now without me there to cover mornings and evenings, she was constantly late. The kids' school would call because someone forgot their lunch or had a meltdown, and Sarah would have to leave work to handle it. Her boss was understanding at first, but you can only be understanding for so long when someone's missing half-days multiple times a week. I have a friend who works in the same medical complex, different office, and she told me Sarah looked absolutely exhausted every time she saw her. Dark circles under her eyes, hair thrown up in a messy bun, coffee stains on her scrubs. Turns out trying to do everything alone is actually hard. Who knew? Week 3, Sarah tried a different approach with me. The angry text stopped, and suddenly everything was apologetic and promising change. She sent me long messages about how she realized she'd taken me for granted, how she understood now what I was dealing with, how if I came back things would be completely different. She said she'd hire regular help, she'd make sure I had my weekends, she'd be a better partner. Part of me, a very small stupid part, almost considered it. Then I remembered her standing in our bedroom saying step up or get out, like I was some employee she could boss around, and I knew nothing would actually change. She'd promise anything to get me back, and then slowly things would slide right back to how they were. I texted her back for the first time in 3 weeks. I said I'd contacted a lawyer and would be filing for divorce. The response was immediate and nuclear. She called me 17 times in a row. She showed up at my brother's apartment building, but security wouldn't let her up. She sent me paragraphs about how I was destroying our family. How could I give up so easily? How she never thought I was the type of man to run away from problems. I didn't respond to any of it. My lawyer was this older woman named Patricia who'd handled my buddy's divorce 2 years earlier. I told her the whole situation in our first meeting, and she just nodded like she'd heard it 1,000 times before. She asked if I'd legally adopted the kids. No. She asked if my name was on anything involving the kids like school paperwork or insurance. No. Everything was still under Sarah and her ex. She asked about the house. I showed her the deed with my name only, dated 3 years before I even met Sarah. Patricia smiled and said this was going to be pretty straightforward. Week 4, Sarah lost her job. I found out because she left me a crying voicemail at 11 on a Tuesday morning saying this was all my fault, that if I hadn't left she wouldn't have been late so many times, that I'd ruined her life. She was hysterical, barely coherent, and part of me felt bad for about 30 seconds. Then I remembered that none of this would have happened if she'd just treated me like a partner instead of free help. She tried to make me feel guilty, said she couldn't afford the mortgage without my income, that she and the kids would end up homeless. I didn't respond, but I did text my lawyer to ask about her trying to stay in my house. Patricia said not to worry, we'd handle it through the courts. Sarah's family started ramping up their involvement after she lost her job. Her dad called me, which was wild because I'd met the man maybe 5 times total. He did the whole stern father routine, saying I needed to be a man and take care of my responsibilities. I told him very calmly that his daughter had given me an ultimatum and I'd chosen the door, and that his grandchildren had a biological father who needed to step up. He didn't like that answer. He said some things about my character that I won't repeat. I hung up on him. The really crazy part happened about 5 weeks after I left. Sarah's sister showed up at my brother's building again, but this time she had all 3 kids with her. Security called up, and I went down to the lobby to see what she wanted. She was standing there with these 3 tired-looking kids, and she literally said I needed to take them for the weekend because Sarah was having a breakdown. I looked at her like she'd lost her mind. I said we weren't together anymore. I wasn't their stepfather anymore. This wasn't my responsibility. The kids were just standing there looking confused and uncomfortable, and I felt horrible for them. But I also knew if I took them even once, it would never stop. The sister started yelling at me right there in the lobby, saying what kind of man turns his back on children, saying I was selfish and cruel. The oldest kid, the 14-year-old, told her they should just go, that they didn't want to stay with me anyway. That hurt more than I expected, but I didn't let it show. I told the sister to leave or I'd call the police for harassment. She grabbed the kids and left, but not before telling me I'd regret this. That same week, Sarah sent me one last message that made it clear she still didn't understand anything. She texted, "All I wanted was a partner who would actually help me." This from the woman who'd been at wine bars 3 nights a week while I made dinner for kids who weren't mine. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this to her, that she'd given me everything, that she thought I was different from other men. She said all she'd wanted was a partner, and apparently that was too much to ask. I finally responded. I told her she didn't want a partner. She wanted a babysitter and a paycheck. I told her step up or get out were her words, not mine, and I'd simply chosen the option she'd given me. I said I was done being her solution to a problem she created. Then I blocked her number. My lawyer filed the divorce papers the next day. The divorce process took about 3 months total, which my lawyer said was actually pretty fast for this kind of situation. Sarah tried to drag it out at first, kept asking for extensions and claiming she needed more time to get her finances in order, but the judge wasn't having it. Our first court date was in early October, about 2 months after I'd walked out, and that's when things got really interesting. Sarah showed up with her own lawyer, some guy who looked fresh out of law school, and they immediately went for the throat. Her lawyer argued that I'd taken on a parental role with the children, that I'd been acting as their father figure for nearly 2 years, and that I should be responsible for child support. My lawyer Patricia just smiled and pulled out a folder full of documentation. School records showing the biological father listed, not me. Medical records, same thing. Insurance paperwork, all under their bio dad. Patricia argued that I'd been married to Sarah for less than 2 years total, that I'd never legally adopted the children, and that I'd never even attempted to take on a parental role beyond normal step-parent duties. The judge asked Sarah's lawyer if he had any evidence of adoption proceedings or any legal documentation showing I'd accepted parental responsibility. He didn't, because there wasn't any. That argument died right there in the courtroom. Then Sarah's lawyer tried a different angle, arguing that she'd become accustomed to a certain lifestyle during our marriage and deserved spousal support. Patricia pointed out that our marriage lasted less than 2 years, that Sarah had her own income during the entire marriage until recently, and that her job loss was due to her own performance issues, not the divorce. The judge looked tired and asked what Sarah's current employment situation was. Her lawyer admitted she'd been let go from her previous position but was actively looking for work. The judge made a note and moved on. The house was the big one, the thing Sarah was really fighting for. Her lawyer argued that it had been the family home, that her children had lived there and shouldn't be displaced, that she had nowhere else to go. Patricia calmly presented the deed showing I'd purchased the house 3 full years before I even met Sarah, that it was my sole property before the marriage, and that under state law it remained my separate property. She also pointed out that Sarah and the kids had a place to live before they moved in with me, implying they could find somewhere else again. The judge asked Sarah directly where she'd been living before our marriage. She admitted she'd been renting a 3-bedroom apartment. The judge ruled the house was mine, period. No dispute, no split, just mine. I watched Sarah's face fall, and I didn't feel victorious, just tired. Then something happened that I absolutely didn't see coming. The biological father of Sarah's kids showed up to the second court date. Nobody had told me he'd be there, and from the look on Sarah's face, she hadn't expected it either. His name was Derek, and I'd met him exactly twice in the entire time I'd known Sarah, both times just brief, awkward exchanges during kid pickups. He asked the judge if he could speak, and the judge allowed it. Derek explained that during my marriage to Sarah, she'd consistently told him that he needed to back off from the kids because I was stepping into the father role, and it was confusing for the children. She'd told him multiple times that the kids didn't need him around as much anymore because they had me now. Then Derek pulled out his phone and started reading texts. Here's from May. Please give us space, Derek. He's bonding with the boys. Another one from July. They're calling him dad now. You're confusing them by being around so much. All lies. He said he'd foolishly believed her and had reduced his visits to almost nothing, just paying his child support and staying away like she'd asked. But after Sarah and I separated, she'd suddenly started demanding he take the kids more, expecting him to cover every weekend, and he'd realized she'd been playing both of us. The judge asked if Derek wanted to modify his custody arrangement. He said yes, he wanted 50-50 custody, that he'd been kept from his own kids and wanted to make up for lost time. Sarah's lawyer objected immediately, but Derek's case was solid. He had documentation of everything, texts where Sarah explicitly told him to stay away, followed by recent texts demanding he take the kids constantly. The judge ordered a temporary custody modification, giving Derek the kids every other week instead of just twice a month, pending a full custody hearing. Sarah looked like she was going to be sick. After that hearing, I ran into Derek in the courthouse parking lot. We ended up talking for about 20 minutes, comparing notes on our experiences with Sarah. Turns out she'd told him I was desperate to be a father figure and was pushing him out. She'd told me he was a deadbeat who didn't care about his kids. Both were lies. Derek seemed like a decent guy who'd been genuinely trying to do what he thought was best for his children based on what their mother told him. We shook hands, and he thanked me for not trying to replace him. I told him those kids needed their actual dad, not some random guy their mom married. The final divorce decree came through in mid-December. I kept the house, all my personal property, my retirement accounts, everything that was mine before the marriage. Sarah got nothing except her own car and personal belongings. No spousal support, no claim to my property, nothing. The judge's ruling was pretty clear that our short marriage and her own choices had led to her current situation. My lawyer told me it was one of the cleanest divorces she'd handled in years. I moved back into my house 2 days after the divorce was finalized. It felt strange at first, like I was walking into a museum of my own life. Sarah had cleared out all her stuff and the kids' things, and the house felt empty in a way it never had before. But it also felt peaceful. I could leave my things where I wanted them. I could spend Saturday morning doing absolutely nothing without guilt. I could come home from work and just exist in silence if I wanted to. It took me a couple of weeks to realize how much constant stress I'd been living with. About a month after the divorce was final, I was scrolling through Facebook late one night and saw that Sarah had posted something public. I don't know why I clicked on it, maybe morbid curiosity. She'd written this long post about how hard it was to be a single mother, how men didn't want to date women with children, how good men were impossible to find, how she'd thought she found one, but he'd abandoned her family when things got hard. The comments were full of her friends agreeing with her, saying she deserved better, saying men were trash. A few people who knew both of us had commented more balanced things, but she'd deleted those. I sat there reading it and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no guilt, no satisfaction. Just nothing. I took a screenshot, sent it to my brother with a laughing emoji, then blocked Sarah on every social media platform I had. My brother texted back saying I dodged a massive bullet and that mom was proud of me for standing up for myself. I made myself a sandwich, cracked open a beer, and watched a movie I'd been wanting to see for months. The next morning I woke up at 10:30, which felt absolutely luxurious. I made coffee, sat on my back porch, and just listened to the birds for a while. No one needed anything from me. No one was fighting in the next room. No one was going through my stuff or making demands or giving me ultimatums. I'd gotten my life back. A few months later, I heard through mutual friends that Sarah had moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment across town and was working 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet. Derek had gotten his 50-50 custody arrangement finalized, so she only had the kids half the time now. She'd apparently tried dating, but it wasn't going well. One friend said she'd asked about me, whether I was seeing anyone, if I ever talked about her. I told a friend I didn't think about her at all anymore, which was mostly true. Sometimes I think about that night when she gave me the ultimatum. Step up or get out. She'd meant it as a power move, a way to force me into the role she'd decided I should play. But ultimatums are funny things. Sometimes the person you're trying to control calls your bluff, and then you're stuck living with consequences you never actually wanted. Sarah thought I'd cave because I always had before. She thought I needed her more than she needed me. She was wrong on both counts. I'm 30 now, still living in my house, still working my job, still enjoying my quiet weekends. I learned an important lesson from all of this. When someone shows you who they really are, when they lay out the terms of how they see you and what they expect from you, believe them. And if those terms aren't acceptable, walk away. No amount of history or hope or guilt is worth living a life where you're just a supporting character in someone else's story. Sometimes the best thing you can do is choose the door and never look back. That's exactly what I did, and I've never regretted it for a single second. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.